Great. So thanks everyone for joining the OpenWhisk Tech Interchange, April 29th. We have a few things on the agenda today, kind of exciting, I think. So I'll do customary introduction. If there's anyone new on the call that would like to introduce themselves, I'll pause briefly to do that in a minute. And then we'll talk about a couple of topics. So the first one is we'll have Jesse from Adobe who will talk about his experience with developing Jamstack and stateful applications using Adobe I/O. And I'll also talk about some work we've been doing at Nimbella in the same space. Very similar approaches. Implementation is a little different. I think we'll show some demos that I think are exciting. So we'll talk a bit more about that. And then Dylan from Adobe is going to talk about some of his work on implementing CNCF workflows for OpenWhisk. I'm particularly excited to see that. And then we'll wrap up the call and a call for a host for the next OpenWhisk Tech Interchange. So I'll pause here if there's anyone new on the call that would like to introduce themselves. Now's the time. Okay. All right, so now let's get into it. A review of notable updates and contributions to the project. These are the ones I looked through in the last 2 weeks that I thought were worth mentioning. Thanks, Neeraj, for the pull request to relabel Prometheus metrics. I think there's this separates namespaces, I believe, for being able to look at metrics across different namespaces in Prometheus. Neeraj, is there anything you want to share about this?
Yeah, sure. So this particular PR handle a special use case we had. We are having some kind of conflict of OpenWhisk namespace and the Kubernetes namespace. We are using external Prometheus, which also relabeling Kubernetes metrics, and that is also having a namespace label into that. So our OpenWhisk metrics are not able to scrap through that Prometheus because there is a conflict between the OpenWhisk namespace label and the Kubernetes namespace label. So what I did in that PR is we can now have a configuration via which Prometheus will be able to relabel all the metrics if we want to, and before sending them to the Prometheus. So that way we can segregate OpenWhisk namespace and the Kubernetes namespace labels.
Great, thank you. Ning, you're also on the call. I think you have a pull request that's been very active on adding an administrative interface to allow operators to modify containers in the system that are pre-warmed. This helps adding different runtimes and being able to scale up and scale down how many stem cell containers are in the system to help with cold starts. Thanks for the contribution. I think Tyson and Dominic have been leading the review process there. Anything you want to say about this one? Nope. Okay, we'll move on. Cosmin has a PR to emit activation records on blocking invokes, and I think this is nearly ready. Or if you're on, anything you want to say about this one?
Okay, Cosmin is not there. I can talk about it.
Okay, please.
Yeah, so what that PR handles is that for the blocking activations, we will not be storing the activation in the data store. There is a performance benefit we get by not storing the blocking activations, because user will always get the result response into that. So what and that configuration is also something like, if user want to have those blocking activations to be stored, then they can provide a header into the request, and then only the blocking activations will be stored. Otherwise, those will not be stored in that case.
Right. And I think this probably helps significantly if you're using Couch for storing activations. This helps reduce the load on Couch for activations. There's one caveat about this, is that if you turn this on for a system that uses CouchDB to store activation logs, those are also lost. Whereas if you're externalizing logs to a service like Elastic or Splunk, then those logs will be available. So there's a small catch there. So thanks, Niraj. I had a couple of pull requests, one stemming from feedback in the community. And so we've updated the README on the project landing page to use and promote the standalone controller. I think we still need an OpenWhisk release before we can make this a little bit more convenient. And then another one that we've hit surprisingly only recently is that if you have web actions that are authenticated, then these would fail options requests, so you couldn't use them with cross-origin API calls. And this patch, which has already been merged, addresses that. This was also shared on the dev list. There are a couple of PRs that are outstanding that I think need some reviews. I have one which improves on Dan's previous PR to encrypt parameters in the database. This is a step to allow us to use an encryption key per namespace. I'd appreciate if someone out there can take a look at that. It's largely a refactoring. There's no semantic change intended, but somebody from Adobe in particular might want to look at this one. There's also a contribution on adding transaction IDs for compositions and making providing essentially the ability to be able to track spans across compositions. I don't know if we've looked at this one. I think it's been outstanding for a while and is a good feature. So if you have bandwidth, it'd be great to give that some attention. Anything else on pull requests or features that others might want to mention? All right, moving on. So we'll get into sort of the main sort of show and tell and some new highlights related to the project. And what I'm focusing on is the ability to build applications that are in a Jamstack style. So Jamstack, if this is new to you or a new concept, is an idea and a methodology for building applications that thinks of the application as consisting of markup, essentially HTML, CSS, JavaScript for the client. So you have your front-end component of the application that is pre-rendered and served essentially from a content delivery network. Because it's static, it's more secure, it's faster because there's no server-side interaction for serving the content, and it's serverless. You deploy your static assets to buckets. They're fronted by a CDN. They're globally distributed, delivered fast, and you don't have to deploy a server for those assets. The second part is extending this model to also encompass APIs. So with that same kind of simplicity, can you do this for APIs? And I think this also fits very nicely with the serverless methodology. And Jamstack has been getting a lot of developer love because it simplifies the developer experience extremely, and it also allows the front-end developer to extend towards the back-end and be able to sort of cross that boundary between front-end and back-end development. So it's really attractive, both from ease of development, ease to deploy quickly, and take advantage of serverless mindsets and methodologies. And so we've been looking at this at Nimbella, and Adobe also has some work in this space that Jesse will talk about. So wanted to just talk a little bit about Jamstack and this notion of pre-rendering plus functions. And there's dozens of frameworks that have popped up for looking at for facilitating essentially how front-end developers can take advantage of this model. And there's lots of frameworks out there, from Jekyll, Gatsby, Next, React, etc. And there's also been a lot of exciting work that's coming out in sort of looking at a full stack model where it's not just the front end, but looking at delivering a platform like Ruby on Rails, both for JavaScript development and development in this Jamstack model. Redwood.js, which I think was publicly announced earlier this month. Since then, 2 more have popped up, Blitz.js and Remix. There's also been a framework out there called Next.js that's also very active with developers. And what you're seeing in a lot of these, and also some of the public offerings that look at Jamstack plus functions from companies like Begin, Netlify, and Vercel, which was formerly Zeit, is that they're really appealing from developer perspective. It's really that ease of use, agility, and the serverless mentality that's resonating. And we've been looking at this at Nimbella, as I mentioned, but so has Adobe, and you're going to hear more about this. Both our work and some of and the Adobe work are powered by Apache OpenWhisk in the sense of that's where functions run, and we've done some number of integrations around that to enable Jamstack and also stateful computation in that context. So how do you jam with OpenWhisk? And this really involves a number of extensions to the serverless functions compute model. Functions is just one building block, but applications are not just functions. They're not just compute. You have to talk about storage and memory. And specifically, I think there's a number of things that I've listed here that are important to consider when you want to develop sort of full applications in this model. And that's delivering an object store where static contents are stored, fronting those objects, store contents by CDN, having some cache management policies, dealing with cores. Obviously, you want to use functions for APIs, and there's where you leverage some of the OpenWhisk power with respect to the programming model and the ability to choose the right language for the job or for the developer. The whole aspect of the Jamstack is that you're thinking of entire projects or entire applications. It's not just functions. So deployment and repeatable deployment in particular is important. Data buckets and stateful functions, I think on the compute side, extend the model from essentially being able to do just stateless computations to also stateful functions. And I think you're going to hear, actually, I'm not sure what Jesse's going to talk about. We didn't confer that closely. But at least on the Nimbella side, you'll hear about how we've integrated some aspects of key value store and data buckets with functions so that as you compute, they're just available and you just use them. So again, resonating or trying to amplify that notion of it's just easy to get started, easy to build, build fast, and create interesting applications. So I'm going to transfer here to Jesse to talk about his experience, and I think he's going to do some demos for this work from their perspective. Jesse, I stopped sharing if you want to switch. Cannot hear you though. Nope. You can flip the order if you want.
Can you,
there you go.
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to let me share because it's telling me, okay, it looks like it. Okay, can you see my screen?
Absolutely, yes.
Thanks for the intro. So yeah, I'm going to do a bit of a little bit of a wandering journey to describe how we got to where we are. So first off is we've been working OpenWhisk for over a year, and we used to have considerable onboarding issues with how people were getting namespaces, and this is really where we decided that we needed some CLI tooling to help us here. So a little over a year ago, we started working on the CLI tooling to help make this easier. And along the way, we discovered what's called OClif. So OClif is an open CLI framework that really makes it easy to produce a pluggable CLI for CLI tooling. So we adopted this and went after it. And it's been really good. So our CLI is the AIO, which is Adobe I/O extensible CLI. And one of the big plugins that has been is probably the most mature is what we call the runtime plugin. So runtime being our deployment of Apache OpenWhisk. So runtime plugin provides feature parity with Whisk CLI and Whisk deploy. So I have a shortcut RT for runtime. So it basically does all the things that Whisk deploy does. So you can find information on this. It's all open source. It's on GitHub, and Rodric has actually sent a lot of pull requests to this. So it's been great. It's a community effort. Another thing that we've come across is we've been spending a lot of time trying to make our products extensible, and to that end, we realized that we needed SDKs for building different things in runtime. And to that end, we came up with the Adobe Target library, which allows you to integrate with the Target APIs for developing your own products that aren't supported out of the box. And similarly with analytics, campaign standard, and customer profiles. So we've provided these as ways to build things inside runtime. And along the way, we were also considering Jamstack and the need to build sort of a cloud native application. So we realized that we needed things like a state library, because applications are stateful where functions aren't, and the need to store files, the need to develop sort of a CDN to host the application. And to that end, we came up with what we call the CLI app plugin for building cloud native applications. So I'll just do a brief demo of how we develop an app, and I can sort of show you the layout of an application, and it's a lot easier to understand if I actually just show it to you. So I'll just do AIO app init with a name. So here I'm presented with a helper, so I can choose what I want to actually add to my application. So I can choose actions, web assets, and CI/CD using GitHub Actions. And so choosing all of those, the next question is what actual actions do I want to add? So if I add a couple of these, it will actually create actions for each of these. And it asks me if I want to change their name, then it goes through and it actually starts to, it creates the app and it npm installs everything. So everything here is on npm. I'm actually just going to go into one that's already done, and so here's an actual project. Is this big enough for everyone?
I can read it. If we can make it bigger,
Can you give it?
would be nice. Yep, better.
There's a good bump. Touchy mouse. Okay, so here's the layout of a cloud native application. So at the top level, we have a web source, and this is where we're actually going to have some static content. And at the same time, we have an actions folder, and we've created, in this case, I only selected one API to integrate, so analytics. So it's created an actual action sample. This is all sample code right here for integrating with analytics, and a generic action, which I can go and do whatever I want inside this action. So you'll probably recognize some things like a manifest YAML, and it describes both functions which are already listed in the actions. And this is actually going to, behind the scenes, be deployed. So if I want to run this, I can just go app run, and it'll do some building. So one of the things that we have to do is we're taking each individual action, and we're doing a quick webpack on it, producing a zip, and then deploying it. So those are all deployed, and then we're actually using parcel.js for the front end code. Ignore that warning. I'm a little out of sync, but so I've now deployed my application to localhost, and I can run it here. And this is the name of my application is populated here. And this is without, without modifying anything. This is just out of the box. I get this. I can select from the actions, and I can try to invoke them. And